Great. Thank you so much, Serge. I'm delighted to be here. As I have read the research on positive psychology over many years, it's occurred to me that we humans are kind of like pianos, but we spend the majority of our time playing only half the keys. We are very adept at worrying, at being fearful, at being sad. And in this COVID pandemic, we have been immersed in those emotions. But there's a whole part of the keyboard that most of us and our clients don't regularly practice, particularly now. Yet we are all born with a full keyboard, the capacity to feel joy, to feel curiosity, contentment, delight, even bliss. Unfortunately, we don't spend enough time practicing those notes or playing those melodies. And as it turns out from the research in positive psychology, the skill and practice of positive emotions, like gratefulness and happiness, is as important to our mental and our physical health as is exercise and diet. And like exercise and diet, it takes intention. It doesn't happen automatically. But when we do feel positive emotions and we take the time to pause and to get a felt sense of them, they actually calm down and nourish the body, the mind, and the spirit. Positive emotions enable us and our clients to be more resilient and then to be able to face life's inevitable hardships. So both focusing and positive psychology, I think, enhance our sense of aliveness. And taken together, I think they can have a profound effect on our sense of well-being. I actually see them as very complementary practices that work together. Jen Lynn's 50-year-old focusing and Martin Seligman, a renowned psychologist, 20-year-old positive psychology. So what does each have to offer each other? Well, as all of you know, focusing offers us an embodied method of transformation. You can start a focusing session feeling upset or anxious and gradually discover a life forward direction. As Jean famously said, nothing bad is ever the last step. There's always more. So what does positive psychology give us? Well, it gives us a map and also a series of pathways of what constitutes well-being and happiness. So it gives us another starting point from which to initiate focusing, the starting point of what we're enjoying or what we're grateful for or what we're appreciating, such as the positive feelings we have for friends and family that sustain us. When we're able to focus on the positive, we can get a felt sense of what the best of something is and what meaning it has for us. So to show that, I think I'd like to share an anecdote from my therapy practice. And last week, a client I'll call Mike, who tends towards depression, early in the session stated very casually and without much affect that he thought that the leaves were more brilliant than usual as they change color this autumn. And I said, I absolutely agree, because we're having a magnificent fall in New England. So then I took the opportunity to invite him to pause, to take a few breaths, to bring his attention into his body, and to pay attention to what it felt like in his body when he gazed at the brilliant colors of the trees. And after a few moments, he said, the intense colors of the leaves this year fills me with some kind of hope. He said, and I don't feel hope very often, and I certainly haven't felt it in the last 7 months of this pandemic. I invited Mike to stay there for a while, to savor the beauty, to let it sink in. And after a few moments, I asked him, what did the hopefulness feel like in his body? When he opened his eyes, Mike said with much more feeling in his voice than usual, "It gives me energy. I feel dull, and then I see the trees, and they're the opposite." And then he said, "I'm kind of curious to go for another walk today to see more trees."
Joan, excuse me a second. Could you slow down a little bit? We have a request from a non-English speaker who's not on the Spanish channel, and also for James, just to slow down just a little bit if you can. Thank you. Thank you.
So this 3-minute invitation or intervention seemed to boost Mike's mood. It also gave him some insight about the effect the trees had on him. And the boost in his mood affected the rest of his session. By savoring positive moments in therapy, these could be moments that are about the client's life, or it could be the moment shared between therapist and client. We are creating openings, and the openings are for connection, perhaps for delight, and certainly for meaning to enter the session and to grow. So let me tell you a little about positive psychology for those who don't know. It started in the year 2000, and it's an evidence-based discipline which proposes that in addition to studying pathology, which psychology is quite adept at, as we know, we also need to study the qualities that make life worthwhile. You know, qualities like resilience and compassion and joy, happiness, forgiveness, gratefulness, optimism. So this body of research in positive psychology by now includes thousands of peer-reviewed studies in journals, and it also includes hundreds of books. And the research demonstrates empirically that cultivating well-being not only improves our moods, which is important, it increases our altruism, our generosity towards others. It makes our thinking more effective. It boosts our creativity. And it impacts our health in very significant ways, including it lengthening our lifespan. So with all these benefits, you might wonder, why is it so hard to sustain a sense of well-being? I think you know that, right? You can feel very happy, and 2 hours later, something in your life or the situation in the world can bring you right down. Well, we can blame our ability to not be able to hold on to the positive on the wiring of our brains. We actually have inherited brains that have what neuroscientists have named a negativity bias. That may be a term that's new to you, and it means that we're drawn more strongly to the negative and we minimize the positive. What does that mean? That means that negative experiences go directly to long-term memory. They stick to us like Velcro. Positive memories, on the other hand, tend to slip off of us as if we are made of Teflon, unless we stay with those positives for 30 to 60 seconds and savor them. And that's exactly what we're doing when we focus on positive feelings. We are savoring them. I am not promoting the use of positive emotions to repress or to deny the feelings we have that are sadness and the frustrations we feel, certainly in the last few months, and the anger that we might have in our own country about how things are being contained. Those really need our attention as well. But I think we need to balance the profusion of difficult emotions most of us are carrying during this pandemic. When we have equanimity, I like to think of that as walking evenly on uneven ground. And when we have more small experiences of well-being throughout our day, we have more energy and we have more presence to bring to our clients. Thich Nhat Hanh says, we have to smile at our sorrow because we are more than our sorrow. So as I wrap up, I want to return to my piano metaphor. We and our clients have a unique concerto in us, but to play it, we need to learn how to play the full range of our keyboards, from the painful emotions to the joyful ones. Focusing on the positive can help us to get there. While alleviating suffering may be the major part of our work, we also need to help clients discover and amplify the positive aspects of their lives. Thanks. When it comes to positivity, I think we all have a range within us. We have struggles and we have joys, right? And so I just really want to emphasize that positive psychology and bringing that into our focusing approach is not slapping a happy face on our misery or our struggles. It's acknowledging and working with those, but also noticing where the light is, right? Noticing where our positive feelings are authentically, right? And it turns out that we aren't equally all ripe for positivity. There were studies done that show that about 50% of our well-being comes from our DNA. You know, whether you are born with the glass half full or half empty, right? So I wonder how many on the panel could just raise your hands if you think you were born with a cheerful gene, that it just, okay, yes, I thought you were too, Laurie. James, a little bit, okay.
I would say optimistic, but not necessarily cheerful.
Okay, well, but yes, so you also have born with that, right? Well, that's great for those of you. And I think I'm in the group that would say I was born a little bit more with the anxious, pessimistic genes. So the good news is that it turns out from this research by Leah Bimorsky, who's a positive psychology researcher, that a whopping 40% of our well-being and happiness comes from our behaviors and our practices. So even if you weren't born optimistic or, as Laurie, kind of joyful, you still have a chance to have a happy life, right? 40% is under your control. Interestingly, in that same study, she found out that our circumstances are only 10% of our happiness. They only determine 10% of our happiness, right? And we tend to think our circumstances are so big. But, you know, in her research, whether somebody won the lottery or had a serious health crisis, a year later, they would come back to baseline of their happiness, right? And I know that Laurie, for instance, had a terrible thing happen. Her house burned down. And yet I saw after about a year, she was back. It wasn't even a year, right? So our circumstances, you know, don't have to determine our well-being. And I think that encourages us with this pandemic, that after it's over, we too, some of us, will come back to baseline. So about the notes that are not played, just as Leslie was saying, you know, you might just have a wisp of positivity and you might be just stuck in your problems. But if you grab hold of that little wisp, it can blossom into a flower, right? And so when I don't introduce the positive to people. I just notice when it's there and I try and amplify it. But my ears are always tuned to it. So, for example, a guy came in and said, "I hate my job. It's soul sucking." And so I asked, say more. What do you mean by soul sucking? And he said, it's dry. I feel like a cog in a machine. I'm not doing anything to improve humanity. So we hear from that. And then I said, what would a soulful job look like? Right? That wasn't in his consciousness. And then so much opened up. He said, a soulful job. Oh, that would be where I was really helping the environment. I love the ocean. I want to move and live closer to the ocean and then do something for climate change, right? And so that was the seed. And over several months, he quit his job and found a job that was much more connected for him and his values, right? So sometimes we just can just notice where the positive might be hiding and bring it out. Also, I want to say that when I do an intake, in addition to asking people about their histories, their families, their presenting problems, I also like to find out their positive resources that they have. So I'll ask them questions like, what kinds of experiences make you feel most alive, right? And then what situations tend to bring out the best in you? I'll also ask, what do you see as your natural gifts and your talents? And are there strengths that you can rely on, even on a bad day, you know? Uh, and then I'll ask, what do you feel particularly thankful for or grateful for? Okay. And I ask that to just open that up between us as a resource, because if we're going to be accompanying someone on their journey, their therapy journey, we need to know what resources they're bringing as well as what problems they're bringing.